Hello. Hi, everyone. Um, my name is Jen. I'm head of programming at Science Gallery London, and I'm really delighted to welcome you to Science Gallery, part of King's College London, and a place to grow new ideas across art, science, and health. Um, the public programme here explores future-facing questions located around the intersection of art, science, and technology through conversations, residencies, exhibitions, and events like this. So tonight's event marks the start of a series of live-streamed discussion events running as part of our current season, Vital Signs, Another World is Possible. And the season really reminds us of how the health of our planet is essential for the survival and well-being of all living things, including us. So through our exhibition and events, we've been asking this question: what changes could we make if each one of us acknowledged the planet's health as an extension of our own? So before I hand over to Kirsty Hewlett, our chair for this evening's panel discussion, I wanted to say a couple of words about, first, the fire exit. So if the alarm sounds, please head up through this staircase behind me, through the fire exit at the back, and also the loos. So the loos are located back the way you came, through the double doors to the right. Okay, now I'll hand over to Kirsty Hewlett, Senior Research Fellow in the Policy Institute at King's College London, to introduce our panel. Thank you and enjoy.
I'm really delighted to welcome you all to Science Gallery London this evening. My name's Kirsty, as Jen mentioned. I'm a researcher from the Policy Institute at King's College London. And I've had the really great privilege of working with Jen and others from the Science Gallery London team as they've put together this really wonderful exhibition called Vital Signs. As we just heard, the exhibition offers some really, really thought-provoking ideas about how we can rethink our relationship with the planet. And also some of the steps we can all take to create a more hopeful and livable future. So if you've not checked the exhibition spaces out upstairs, please do. And so I personally came to be involved in Vital Signs through my work, which tends to focus on how members of the public and communities can have more of a say in the actions that affect their lives. So we work across lots of different topic areas, but recently I've been working with colleagues on the Hopeful Futures project, which thinks about how we can live well with the impacts of climate change. So we've been working with Jen on that project too. But tonight what we'll be thinking about is what happens when communities take matters into their own hands. So we have a really, really incredible panel of people that have been doing the hard work of making that happen. And they'll be sharing their experiences from a really wide range of perspectives and experiences. But what really connects them all, you've got such great different things that you bring to the table, but you've all just been working so hard to realise this potential for local ground-up change that's really making a difference, both in the UK as a whole, but also particularly here in London in the boroughs in which King's is based. And I hope, at least for myself, getting to know the panel, I think it's reminds us that climate action can actually sometimes be hopeful and lead to maybe a better society than we have at the moment. And I think sometimes we can lose sight of that when we're thinking about the enormity of the challenges we're facing when we're talking about the climate and ecological crises. So I hope you'll find the presentations as inspiring as I do, and join me in just enjoying hearing about a series of initiatives that have made really meaningful change within our communities. And later on, we'll be thinking a little bit how we can scale up these types of initiatives too. So how can we make these grassroots things greater than the sum of their parts? So we're going to start broad. So we have Rory Crawford on the screen here from the National Trust. So Rory is the Neighbourhoods Manager at the National Trust, and he'll be talking to us about a range of community-led initiatives that are taking place across the UK. And it's building on some really interesting and ambitious work that Rory's been working on in his role at the National Trust, but also with RSPB and WWF around how you can bring people in, sort of ordinary citizens, into thinking about how we can rebuild our connection with nature. And then we'll be learning about two case studies. So we have Tori Sherwin here, who's the founding director of Incredible Edible, down on the other end of the panel. She'll be talking to us about a network of food growers in Lambeth that's now made up of 120 groups with over 500 individual members, and how that work is trying to ensure healthy food is growing here in London, and really making a meaningful difference for food poverty and poor health. Our second case study comes from Loretta and Alice here. They are working together on a community-led project in just down the road, a couple of thousand miles down the road in South Bermondsey. Are trying to make that space not only increase the biodiversity, but also working with local communities to make sure that space is usable and meeting their needs as well. So really looking forward to hearing more about that project. And finally, we have Councillor Rezina Chowdhury, who's Deputy Leader of Lambeth Council. Lambeth Council is a super incredible organisation, I think, within London. It was the first London borough to declare a climate emergency and has been working towards operating at net zero by 2030. So we'll be hearing a bit about some of the work that the council's been doing to bring residents and organisations within the borough into those discussions. So the way this evening will work, you'll hear short presentations from each of our panellists. We'll then open it up for discussion across the panel, and then it'll be over to you for questions. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Rory, who's joining us online from Glasgow. So he's going to talk about the work that he's been doing as the Nature Neighbourhoods Manager for the National Trust. So with that, I'll hand over to Rory.
Hello. I've made the first fatal mistake, which is sharing the wrong screen, so let me try again. Let's see if I can do it properly this time. Here we go. There we are. Right. And I'm just going to make sure I can get this up on the screen. Can you see that okay? Excellent. So, hello everyone. Great to meet you all, and feeling slightly unnerved by the fact that my face is being projected into your room at sort of 40 times its actual size, like some bespectacled Scotch egg. So yes, I'm Rory. I'm based in Glasgow and work for the National Trust on the Nature Neighbourhoods project, which is a partnership with RSPB and WWF and 18 community organisations up and down the UK, and it's funded by the National Lottery Community Fund and Co-op. And yeah, prior to that, as Kirsty mentioned, I was part of the team that ran a citizens' assembly, which resulted in the creation of the People's Plan for Nature, which is pictured here, and you can find it online. Please do go and check that out. And this is a sort of participatory public call to action on what is needed to tackle the naturing crisis in the UK. And actually, Nature Neighbourhoods is a response to one of the calls to action in that plan. So two very connected pieces of work that are really all about grassroots action, which is obviously what tonight is all about. So I'm delighted to be here and to be in among such a brilliant panel. Before I get into the hope, I think it's probably important to be super clear about the challenge, which I know everyone's aware of, but we're obviously in the midst of overlapping crises of health, mental health, loneliness, climate, biodiversity. The UK is one of the least biodiverse nations in the world. So it's little wonder, I think, that we're also one of the least nature-connected nations in the world too. And I know it's stating the obvious, but I don't think it gets said plainly and often enough that without nature, we've got no food, we've got no water, we don't have air to breathe. It's fundamental to our existence because we're part of it. We are it. And yet that narrative is so completely absent from our media, and the sort of top-down prescription that we've got for fixing it is failing. And that's in part because it's nowhere near ambitious enough, obviously, but it's also because it's not sufficiently included people. All too often, I think, because of the kind of misanthropic view that we are the problem rather than the systems we've created. And given that most of us live in towns and cities, I think that's where we need to rebuild that connection. It's where we need to begin. We need to bring more green space into the urban habitat and involve community in identifying what they need to help create it, to look after it, and to spread the love for it. Now, I was asked to give examples of what community action looked like in practice. I know you're going to be diving into London and Lambeth in particular shortly. So my examples are from elsewhere. And the first is granting community gardeners who are in Edinburgh, based in a council estate in Edinburgh. They started 15 years ago with a sign from one of the residents of the estate, Tom, sticking a sign up asking if anyone would like to turn up one Saturday, dig one of the neglected grass corners in the estate into a growing space. Now, he thought maybe 4 or 5 folks would be keen, but was totally surprised when loads of folks showed up with tools and seeds. And you know, people spoke to some of their neighbours that for the very first time, and they turned this patch of grass. You can see it, the top right-hand picture there is the patch of grass that they first turned over. And they made it into a productive growing space, and corny as it sounds, not just a productive growing space for veg, but also for community connection too. And it wasn't long before someone from the other end of the estate suggested they do something similar on one of their neglected corners. And you can see what these corners look like now in this picture in the bottom right, you know, just full of growing space, sunflowers, amazing veg. And over time, more and more of these corners in the estate were turned into growing space. And later, via a community asset transfer, they took over a gap site and converted it from compacted rubble, which you can see in the top left-hand corner there, to a communal growing space for all the residents, complete with chickens and an orchard that you can just about make out in that picture below. That's what the site looks like now. Every Wednesday, they've got a community gardening day, along with a free community lunch in the same day that anyone can come along to and get free hot food. And I'd implore anyone who's in Edinburgh to go along on a Wednesday and experience it, because it's people from every background in the community working together to make their place greener, eating delicious food, nourishing one another. As a way of sort of building community connection, I can't think of many better examples. It's inclusive, it's about pride of place, it's serving needs in terms of feeding people and tackling loneliness. It's absolutely brilliant. And subsequently, it's gone in all sorts of directions. So they've set up a free shop in an old shipping container where people can come and get clothes and toys. They create the community bakery selling real bread at affordable prices and made from wheat that they've grown on street corners in their community. Honestly, you've got to believe me when I say it's a remarkable sight to see these big heritage varieties of wheat swaying in the wind in an Edinburgh Council estate. And it's just a testament to tapping into community care and energy. I think it's brilliant. The next organisation I'd like to mention is Green and Main D, who are part of Main D Unlimited, based in Newport in Wales. And the organisation was originally born out of an effort to save the local library, which has been transformed into this amazing community asset and space. So it's not just a library, it's got language classes, they host weddings, gigs, all sorts. And Main D's got a real dearth of green space. You know, like many other underserved communities around the UK, it's heavily grey and really not very much green at all. And Green and Main D have sort of sought to tackle this head on an absolute shoestring by converting the grey to green in their community wherever they can. And I particularly love this garden I've pictured in the middle here, under these big advertising hoardings, and right next to it, what you can't see the other side of this picture, is a dual carriageway. And they've got these huge wildlife-focused community murals as well. So you can see the sort of gable end of someone's house here, this amazing wildlife scene. They're creating places for the community to gather, places for kids to play, addressing issues like the urban heat island effect, which we know is going to become increasingly important, creating food growing space, and again, tapping into feelings of pride of place and asset that I talked about with Granton just a moment ago. And I could keep going. I'm obviously frustrated not to be able to tell you a story from all 18 of the communities that we're working with in our project. I chose Granton and Main D, I guess, intentionally, because they're two very grassroots community organisations working in low-income neighbourhoods and without huge grants or funding streams, and doing things in a really super community-focused way. They've zoned in on the needs of people in a real way and are seeking to serve those needs. And in doing so, they're increasing the biodiversity value of their places, they're connecting people to nature in a way they can relate to, and helping connect folk to one another and the bigger challenges of the nature and climate crises. And it's just driven by total gumption, basically. So I guess the question is obviously, how can we do more of it? And I know we're going to get into it in the Q&A. And for me, I think we really need to see that community voice is central to us turning the climate and biodiversity crises around, because it's in our communities that we need to rebuild that lost nature connection I talked about at the start. And the people best placed to do that are the organisations that are already out there and trusted in their places, not just creating green spaces, but running youth clubs, arts groups, sports clubs. Too often other organisations like big NGOs like I work for, or maybe local authorities in some cases, try to fulfil that role. And actually, I think big organisations are often better served by letting the community experts lead and thinking about how we can put our expertise, the things that we are good at as NGOs or local authorities or whatever, in service of that, in service of those smaller organisations. And it's actually the sort of core objective of the Nature Neighbourhoods project to put national NGO knowledge in support of community organisations, recognising that it's much more efficient and not to mention ethical, and not to mention the fact we've not tended to do it in the past, so it's an important change in approach. Now, most community organisations don't have an issue with delivery. They can deliver projects with their eyes closed. What they need is a supportive environment rather than a sort of hamster wheel of short-term funding. So we really need to build that community capacity through knowledge sharing, a support program, much more flexible funding for that type of strategic development work to help them bring in bigger institutional funding rather than these small pots of funding that people get sent to so frequently, and it causes so much stress. And we need to work through community organisations to build a picture of what people's priorities are when it comes to nature and climate action locally. So we need to use co-design processes to understand what people want and need to ensure we're addressing local priorities and creating buy-in, sort of local people's plans for nature, not superimposing our ideas of what's right for nature or biodiversity, whatever else. And then from here, we need community organisations trusted by local authorities to be delivery partners to make these plans happen, whether that's via contracts or asset transfers or whatever it might be from a local authority, and then have the local authority do what they're able to do in terms of unlocking the bureaucracy, opening doors, perhaps leveraging in finance from housing developments or whatever else to make that work happen. So, sounds simple, right? That's my provocation. I'm looking forward to hearing from the rest of this brilliant panel and getting into your questions as well. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Rory. Really great provocation to open with there. So now I'm going to hand over to Tori, who is director of Incredible Edible Lambeth. So she's been with Incredible Edible for quite some time. So she led the development of Myertsfields Parks. This is a public park that's just down the road from our Denmark Hill campuses. And has run it as a community hub for over 20 years, up until 2023. But this isn't her only accomplishment. She's now working to advocate for the right to grow, as well as leading the development of a grassroots consortium in her neighbourhood called Food 5 Ways. She's passionate about working from the grassroots and to create socially just, environmentally sustainable cities. So I'll hand over to Tori.
Oh yeah, thank you. That's very nice. So it's really nice to follow on from that because there's so much about food growing, which really helps to set the context, and I agree with everything you said. So the history, Incredible Edible Todmorden started in about 2008, and I don't know if you know about them, but they've just started growing in the streets. They grew in sort of police stations and any public land that they could, and they set up this model of Incredible Edible where other people and other groups could just adopt the name and do whatever they wanted. So we're all very different, and they've got Incredible Edibles all over the world and all over the place. I won't try to remember our vision, but basically we support food growing in Lambeth. There are 120 group members in Lambeth, so a lot of the credit, goes to the food growers really. Groups that have formed and developed, and we're not credited with any of those. We formed as a network in 2012 to try and amplify the voices of food growers, try to get better policy support, try to get more joined up action and to support food growing and food growers. We've got 562 individual members. And the things that we do are, we do a monthly e-bulletin, which just kind of provides information for food growers. We do an annual seed swap, which we've got it coming up on the 15th of March in the Garden Museum. We have about 50 people come along to that, and people swap seeds. The Blooming Lambeth Awards we ran until last year. It was a fantastic thing because we give awards in about 8 different categories, and it just really showcased how fantastic the food growers are, and it acknowledges the incredible work that they do, the incredible hard work that they do, unacknowledged a lot of the time. And we do campaigning. We campaign for pesticide-free streets, and Lambeth implemented that in 2023. Our past projects, I'm going to just go through all of these. So we did Grow Back Greener, which was funded by the Mayor's Office, where we supported 6 groups of residents to put in gardens on the estates. There were people who wanted to do it. So partly we're always looking at what's the model for supporting people to do this, what's the model for developing projects, and part of that emerged a template of engagement, because it's sometimes council workers aren't experienced at managing estates, and they just chop all the food down. So it's like, how do we get this agreement with the council to make sure that their capacity is built so that they can support people? And we learnt an awful lot of that about how hard it is for people to do these projects and how much is on them when they often are struggling in all sorts of ways to manage anyway. And and then during COVID, we did a virtual seed swap. There was massive interest in food growing, and we sent out compost and seeds to people because they wanted to grow at home. And then we did food stories, which was really brilliant, focusing on different issues online and bringing together local people who are growing and kind of national experts. And we explored things like biodiversity and composting. And then that actually led, the talk we did on composting led to our zero waste project, where we got funding from the National Lottery to develop composting projects on housing estates. Because one of the shocking things that I didn't know is that a lot of people who live in flats can't separate their waste, they just have to chuck it all in the bin. So it was trying to develop a model where we supported, we engaged local people, they helped us design the projects, and then we helped train them in how to make compost, and then talk to them about how the bins should look and how they should operate, and then we put in 15 different projects across the borough, and they're all still operating. We work with Arup, which is a big engineering firm, to map green space, to sort of look at a methodology for mapping green space in the borough, and also looking at the barriers to food growing for food growing groups, and within the council, what kind of things are in the way, and then again developing the model for how we work with the council. And we have developed 6 walking maps of the borough. So the aim always is to kind of highlight food growing projects and connect people to them and their local projects. And we've got TfL funding at the moment to lead walks. We've got funding from Lambeth Council to improve the biodiversity of 6 housing estates at the moment. So all these times we work with residents to see what they want to do. We just ask them what they want to do, and then we support them. And what's coming out of that that's really interesting is that food growing is the key, actually. That we wish, the person who's run it, who's coordinated it, says she wished she'd gone in through food growing, because food growing spaces are the most biodiverse spaces there are. And also people engage with it because they can understand it. We are doing something called Growing from the Root, which is supporting residents on housing estates who are running food growing projects to run an event. So we do 1 a month. So it's a great little project because we can provide them with £650 worth of whatever they want, really, so that they can have the resources they need, or they can food and refreshments and posters, and also there's a bit of capacity building, teaching them how, supporting them to organise events when they might not have done it before. And that helps with bringing in volunteers and joining the groups up quite a lot. We have a lovely one on Saturday where we gave out seed, and quite a few groups came and got it. And gardeners are very voracious when it comes to, and this seed, desperate to get some nice seed. And one of the things that is most interesting, so a lot of these is sort of supporting individual projects or individual actions, but Right to Grow is a national and international campaign by Incredible Edible, and they actually put a motion to Parliament to pass the idea that people would have right to land and right to policy support, and of course it didn't get anywhere, but now we're working on a London Right to Grow. But the great thing is, what I love about food growing, as well as all the benefits it has, is the connecting to sort of bigger issues, and so we're working with Sustain and Capital Growth and Community Food Growers Network and Land Workers Alliance to come together on issues that affect us all, and to try and get better support, policy support for food growing, because at the moment there's very little, and I think quite often people think, well, urban food growing doesn't produce very much food, or it doesn't have much impact, but actually, given the complete lack of support in terms of policy and funding, there's a bit of funding, and obviously we work with the council to enable it, but there's no kind of formal recognition of how important it is, and it's amazing. People just keep doing it, and the amount that people do is incredible. But we're going to, hopefully Lambeth will be one of 4 boroughs this year where we do a deep dive into what Right to Grow will look like and what it means. And Food 5 Ways is this neighbourhood project. It's where I live, and I worked for Myertsfield Park, as we said, for about 20 years, and we supported food grow. We produced about 40,000 baby seedlings a year and distributed them to about 50 projects. And then there are other amazing projects all the way through this area. It's what people call a food desert. So there's hardly any shops, and there's very poor food, and the environment's pretty poor, and there's a lot of youth violence. But there's lots of organisations working with food, and food is the most brilliant way to engage people and to sort of, growing food and then cooking and eating it together forms relationships that just don't break down. And so we're looking at how do we escalate the benefits of all that we do and try and actually bring about kind of system change. And and the future projects we've got are, we're really pleased to say we've secured 5 years funding from City Bridge, which will enable us to do systematic support for members, building their organisational and social capacity. So a lot of people are running a project on their own, often in a situation that might be quite a lot of conflict. They've not run an organisation before. There's all these kind of challenges that they face. So the idea is to really get behind them and sort of understand what they need, co-design any kind of upskilling and training that they need, and and it's great that we've got 5 years to do it and get them all on the map, get them all, highlighting what they do and bringing them together and strengthening the movement and really developing them as climate leaders and hopefully engaging them with the advocacy and, strengthening their voice. And then Lambeth Council's just given us some money to support 3 schools to start growing. So all of it is all the time is kind of experimenting with models for how do we support food growing. That's it. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Tori. And it's really lovely to see so many South London residents, like so many familiar locations, but just from a completely different vantage point. It's really, really inspirational stuff. So next up, we have Loretta Bosents and Alice Edgerley, who are collaborating together, as I mentioned, to refurbish Bramcote Park in Southwark. So Loretta here is a landscape architect, a researcher, writer, and co-founder of Local Work Studio. So Local Work Studio are designers and hands-on circular economy specialists who focus on the creative use of site materials, local manufacture and processing, with a really strong focus, as has come through in Rory and Tori's presentations, on participatory methods and how you bring people into those projects. And Loretta will be joined by Alice, next to Loretta, who's a founding member of Assemble. So Assemble are a collective that in 2015 won the Turner Prize for their project Granby 4 Streets. And she's led on a wide range of community projects throughout the UK that's been furthering this work. She's passionate about making places that are more equitable and accessible and supporting diverse kinds of activity alongside varied plant, animal and insect life. So I'll hand over to Loretta and Alice now to tell us about their work at Bramcote Park.
Great, thanks very much. It's really great to be here and a really cool panel. So yeah, looking forward to our discussions later. So we're working with Southwark Council, and it's great. We've got our client in the audience, Rachel, on the refurbishment of Bramcote Park. And it's a small public park in South Bermondsey, which is hopefully due to go on site in the next few months. And it's surrounded by a sort of low-rise housing estate, and it's currently a really tired green space that is split in half by a road. The north, which is those top 2 images, holds all the sort of play equipment, but a lot of it's broken, and there's not really any sort of nature aspects in the north. And the south is where there are all the sort of mature trees, holds all the sort of the nature parts of the site, but no play opportunities. There's very little sort of biodiversity across the site, and sort of very limited opportunities for like a range of types of play. And there's a real problem with a lot of dog poo and litter and stuff, which I guess is just a problem with lots of public green spaces in all over the country. But yeah, today we're going to talk about what the brief and ambitions are for Bramcote Park and what we're trying to achieve with the project. And our core concept for the park is kind of building on the sort of existing characteristics of the site, but to spread the sort of nature and play opportunities across the whole site, and to create what we call a sort of park of two halves, with a biodiverse and climate resilient forest garden in the south, and a sort of robust and elegant public square in the north. So one of the key themes of the project is creating sort of series of playable landscapes. And so this is basically, we've been building on the existing characteristics of the site and sort of enriching them. So we've got the sort of more open part in the north, where there's a sort of a green buffer with an orchard meadow around the public square and a swale. And then the woodland area is where there are sort of mature trees. And we hope that this will encourage sort of a greater diversity of people to use the park in a range of ways. And we're sort of looking at those different sort of play opportunities that can create. So from the sort of like more meadowy mounds in the south, and like more woodland areas with big trees and places to sort of swing from and hide. And the swale, which is the one in the bottom left, which is sort of big drainage feature, but to make that sort of exciting and engaging for people to explore and play with. And then the sort of robust public square for more like, you know, a whole range of different kinds of play, like sort of ball games, but also like events and stuff like that. But I guess the aim is for people to have a sort of a greater quality of play that is not prescriptive, where nature is also a participant in that as well, and they're directly connecting to it, so that people can take risks in a safe and stimulating environment.
Oh, thank you, Alice. Oh yeah, so one of the aims of our brief set by our client is to increase sort of biodiversity on the site, and that's kind of understanding that often what is good for nature is good for people. And we want to create a place that feels natural for the sort of the users of the park and the residents. And to achieve this, we're mainly using our sort of the way we plant the site. So this diagram shows that is a sort of an extension of that landscape diagram that you saw before about the playable landscape. So it's exaggerating the character that already exists and creating these kind of miniature landscapes. So we'll be one of the ways we'll increase biodiversity is by planting 96 new trees, which sounds a lot, but some of them will be, you know, there'll sort of be a real variety of sizes, and that will include an orchard. And that is to supplement these very large and mature London plains that already exist on the site. And some of these new plantings will be trying to implement a sort of more relaxed maintenance regime, which requires more care and observation, but less kind of this kind of routine cutting that you see in a lot of parks, which kind of results in these slightly sort of degraded landscapes. And these are the kind of landscapes that we're hoping to create. So we'll be building sort of hillocks around the site and orchards that can be foraged, a sort of central square with trees in it, a swale and a sort of woodland edge, which is much more sort of biodiverse, and it's that structural diversity that really brings the sort of increase in wildlife. So these kind of lots of different sizes of plants, lots of different fruit and flowers. And the sort of the reasoning behind this is that we want to create a sort of vitality in the park, and somewhere people can sort of connect to nature and have somewhere which is calm and a really sort of sensory sort of environment, which will sort of help to improve feelings of well-being, and somewhere they can be active outside and also sort of hopefully provide opportunities where people can engage in the care of the park. So another sort of important aspect of our design is that we want to implement a sort of a real circular economy in the design of this park. So to make better use of the things that we already have on the site, and to take a sort of low waste approach, so not to throw anything away if possible, and to use the resources and knowledge that exist locally in London and in the surrounding landscapes. So we've part of this process was mapping the sort of material opportunities, which involved sort of desk-based sort of analysis, but also mainly just going around talking to people and through our sort of co-design workshops, trying to understand the hidden sort of knowledge that is already there and the kind of opportunities that we might have to use waste materials. So we'll be doing this by specifying, so for example, we'll be using coppice chestnut for some of the play equipment, also felled trees from, street trees from London, and working with the Southwark Parks Department and using their wood chip from their tree works for the play surfacing, rather than sort of the more sort of rubberised variety that you see. We'll be using clean masonry, construction waste, and quarry waste to create surfacing for the park, which is kind of semi sort of absorbent as well, and reusing all of the sort of metal work in the park, so the existing fencing, rather than kind of taking it all out and replacing it with new, we're going to repurpose it all with a sort of a metal worker based in South London. And so we're taking the existing play things. So there's a sort of swing set that has been broken for years, and we're going to turn that into a more sort of sociable play opportunity, which is like a bench swing, which is something that's come out of some of our co-design with young people. And the idea is that hopefully will provide a sort of an exemplar of best practice in circular economy in the sort of built environment and public space, where we sort of invest in local economies and people as much as possible and build capacity for change, and sort of take people on the journey so that they can see that, parts of the park, they can see that they've been modified and changed and reused, and they can sort of read that sort of reuse in the materials on the site.
That sort of leads on to our final core theme, which is about participation. I guess just following on from the play equipment stuff, obviously those kids play, that's part of their landscape and has been for ages. So for us to sort of reuse that is an important part of it. But so we've tried to include the sort of key stakeholders and residents in the development of the park from the beginning, particularly because this park is literally on the doorsteps of a number of people's homes, and it's one of the few public green spaces in the area. And we really believe that this project that Bramcote Park has the opportunity to become the sort of neighbourhood's shared front garden. And we want to build in capacity and create opportunities for participation throughout the whole design process. So that started from the development of the brief itself. So we organised a sort of a series of meetings with local residents and community champions to interrogate the brief at the beginning of what Bramcote Park should be for. And then we worked with our partner Assemble Play on the top left to run a series of sort of free play events on the site so people can start to see how the park can be used in different ways, to residents design review on the site where we're on the top right, where we're looking at the design as it develops, and gardening workshops connecting to local gardening groups with green-fingered residents, and there's a plan to deliver community planting days when it's on site, and then also with a youth design workshop with the Blue Community Centre, which is a community centre just by the site, talking to 12 to 14-year-olds about what they want to see in the park. And I guess that also goes through to sort of people being involved in the construction of the park itself and its longer-term maintenance. So we're hoping to work with the Youth Construction Trust, which is a charity based nearby, on delivering aspects of the park, one of which would be a concrete ping pong table, which would be designed so it could be built by people with sort of little or early stages in their skill development, to sort of make this table tennis table together. And I guess we hope that this will create sort of stronger friendships and a sense of community, and that people will want to have a stake in looking after Bramcote Park in the long term, and for it to be this shared neighbourhood front garden and end up being a green asset that is useful, healthy, enjoyable, vital, and dynamic. So,
Thank you.
thanks very much.
Thank you both, and a really nice compliment to hear alongside Rory and Tori's presentations of a project that's evolving as we speak today, which is fantastic. Finally, we have Councillor Rezina Chowdhury, who's Deputy Leader of Lambeth Council. She first became a councillor in 2014 and has been representing Streatham Hill ever since, and is now responsible for the council's actions on the climate and ecological emergency. She's overseen the delivery of Lambeth's ambitious transport strategy, so this has included things like advancing active travel in the borough and also launching Lambeth's pioneering and award-winning curbside strategy in 2023. And again, just following on from this kind of theme of co-creation that's going through all of the presentations outside of her career in politics, she's also focused on public and engagement and opinion gathering to deliver impactful social behavioural change as a mixed methods researcher focused on social policy development. So over to Rezina.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Wonderful panelists talking about in such detail about the amazing work you do. And I'm going to take a much broader approach to tell you all about what we've been doing in Lambeth. And so apologies for the South London focus on this. So Lambeth is just, a neighbouring borough to here. So we're currently in Southwark. And in case anyone, doesn't know, it's just to give you some context, Lambeth is an inner London borough with 330,000 residents. And we have massive levels of deprivation. And coupled with that, low car ownership and high levels of hospitalisation and deaths from pollution-related illnesses. So that was the impetus, really, for us to declare a climate and ecological emergency back in 2019. And as Kirsty said, we were the first London borough to do this. And we committed to ensuring the council's operations are net zero by 2030. And we've been on a very long journey since then, because we need to be guided by the science and pursue our ambitious programs that promote action now, not 15 to 20 years from now. And we've set a net zero target for the council and the borough, and we've made considerable progress since we declared that climate emergency in 2019. And it hasn't been easy because, as you will all know, not everyone's on the same part of that journey. There are others who need to be brought along gently. So in 2020, we held a citizens' assembly that brought together a representative sample of local people to learn about and guide our response to the climate crisis. And during the discussions, which covered a range of issues, and I should stress that this was, we planned it before the pandemic and we conducted it during the pandemic. So it's all done online, and that, the challenges of trying to get a rep sample online with varying levels of competence in tech, training people up to make sure that they felt equipped and enabled to take part. So there's a lot of thinking that went into that, but we needed to make sure that our residents that we spoke to were representative of our borough. And so, they spoke about loads of things. They spoke about food growing, they talked about recycling, retrofitting, active travel, and our residents said they wanted, more space for socialising. They wanted, safe spaces for children to run and play, and they wanted more greenery on their streets. And that led to the development of our climate action plan, which included the commitment to take 25% of the curbside space and use it sustainably. And the other commitment was reducing traffic volumes by 27% by 2030. In 2023, we published our curbside strategy, which set out how we would achieve this reallocation of the curbside to sustainable uses. And we also published our air quality action plan with a commitment to WHO air quality standards, and that was in 2022. I'm just going to move over to the next slide and hoping this works. Has it worked? Oh, right, okay. So, so this, before, I just want to explain this picture because unlike my fellow panelists, my slides don't tend to coordinate very neatly with what I'm saying. So I feel I need to explain this slide. So this is an amazing school street in Kennington Oval. If you haven't visited yet, I recommend that you do. And you were talking about table tennis tables earlier. We've got one just there. Can you see it? We've got a couple of table tennis tables. So we have two schools there, the Henry Fawcett School, Primary School, and St Mark's. And the idea was that we're putting out school streets all across Lambeth, and this location provided an amazing opportunity to create a reimagined space, about reimagining what our public space could look like, working with the local community, and this is what we came up with: basically filtered traffic, no cars can go down it, and it's basically a play street for kids. Kids can come out of school and they can just walk down that road, and there's no cars. So, and that's the ambition. Obviously, as I said, these things aren't easy. There's challenges along the way. So, but the thing that drives us, I suppose, is that we know that issues like climate change and air pollution don't affect people equally, and lower income households, older people, and those with long-standing health conditions will undoubtedly feel the effects much more. So reaching our climate action plan goals will help us to achieve those other benefits, which include things like better jobs, training, boost the local economy, improve mental and physical health, and also clean our air. So, and our goal to become net zero compatible by 2030 will be defined by our 5 priorities, which include adaptation, buildings and energy, transport, waste, consumption, and food and biodiversity and environmental quality. There's quite a lot there, and so I'm going to break that all down. So firstly, adaptation. So with changing weather patterns, our infrastructure, habitats and communities are at risk from higher temperatures, increased rainfall and more unpredictable weather. In 2023, in Lambeth, we launched the borough's curbside strategy, setting out how the curbside will support the borough's response to the climate emergency, tackle inequality and enable a wide range of other strategic goals, importantly, cleaner air. So in Lambeth, the curbside space is equivalent to, so just to clarify, the curbside space is the bit between the carriageway and the footway, the bit where people tend to park their cars. And that space is equivalent to 194 football pitches. And it's a huge, huge public asset and a huge space. And the Climate Action Plan agreed that 25% of this space would be reallocated to support resilience to climate change. So, things like planting trees, rain gardens, and parklets. So those are the kind of things, just a few of the things that we're thinking about, but not exclusively. And it's important to note that, only 40% of Lambeth households have access to a car, yet 94% of the curbside is used for car parking. So this strategy is about fairness, and it sets out these principles for the curbside, including pricing, which I'll come on to. So the second point was buildings and energy. So our greatest use of energy is in heating and powering our buildings, and best practice climate action requires us to reduce energy demand by retrofitting buildings to be warmer, more efficient and comfortable. So by responding to our Citizens' Assembly calls on retrofits for low-income residents, this means more comfortable, healthier, warmer, and cheaper to heat homes, which is something that we're working on. Thirdly, transport. So transport emissions make up almost a quarter of the total emissions from the borough, mainly from cars on our roads. Shifting how we travel towards walking, cycling, and public transport means that we can reduce car traffic, reduce congestion, and improve our air quality. And for those that still need a car, we're saying, well, okay, you can move to electric, you can use other zero-emission fuels to cut our greenhouse gas emissions within the borough. And things like last-mile deliveries via cargo bikes, again, that's something else that we're pushing. We've got, currently across the borough, we've got at least 7 e-cargo bikes, which we've dotted across in front of certain businesses, and we're encouraging local businesses to use those more. So another stat, so air pollution in Lambeth kills around 100 residents and hospitalises 750 every year. And long-term exposure to air pollution causes illnesses. I'm sure you're all aware. I feel like I'm teaching grandmothers to suck eggs here, but asthma, pulmonary disease, and lung cancer. And more worryingly, it stunts the growth of our children's lungs. Children, around a third of London's schools are close to busy roads and exposed to illegal levels of nitrogen dioxide pollution. And to hit our ambitious climate goals by 2030, we need to reduce journeys by at least 27%. And that's why the council set out a new pricing structure for parking in the borough. So the more a vehicle pollutes, the more the driver pays. And these changes ensure that the cost of parking affects the real impact that cars have on our health, encouraging more people to switch to cleaner transport. And we're doing all we can to make sure that it makes putting more infrastructure in to help people think about cycling more. So free cycle confident classes and more cycle lanes, quiet ways, low traffic neighbourhoods, all of those kind of things will encourage, hopefully, even the most nervous cyclists to use that kind of sustainable transport, as well as public transport. So not forgetting that's critical. Fourthly, as Tori's already mentioned about food, so we're talking about waste consumption and food. So every time we buy something, we drive demand for production, which increases emissions. And whenever we create waste, there's a climate impact, not only in the energy emissions generated in producing the thing that we're disposing, but also how it's disposed of. And collaboration with urban food growing projects such as Incredible Edible Lambeth and Pan-London food waste campaigns will help reduce our consumption. And by switching to lower carbon goods, we hope to have an even greater impact and influence on the emissions within and beyond Lambeth. And finally, and that's the fifth point, biodiversity and environmental quality. I mean, the climate crisis is intertwined with the ecological crisis, with biodiversity plummeting globally. Green space and nature help to lower temperature and provide clean air and support our local wildlife and absorb rainfall to reduce flood risk. And we want to ensure that as we tackle climate change, we also improve environmental quality and increase biodiversity in Lambeth by investing in sustainable urban drainage systems, the biggest tree planting programme in Lambeth's history. We're aiming to get 5,000 trees by the end of this administration, a biodiversity action plan, No Mow May, and among a multitude of community-led initiatives. And I just want to go to my final slide. Sorry, I know I'm out of time, but it's just to talk about the climate action, climate partnership. Because we know we can't deliver this by ourselves. We need to work in partnership. And we launched our climate action partnership, in 2022, 12 founding members, And in 2024, we launched the Climate Partnership Platform, which you can see on screen here. And it's open to all Lambeth-based businesses and organisations. And the aim is to create an ecosystem of collaboration and climate action by all types of organisations, schools and residents across the borough. So everyone can get involved, sign up for the newsletter, explore volunteering opportunities. And I'm really sorry that I ran over time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rezina. And you've gone wonderfully full circle with the presentation that Rory gave at the beginning in terms of, you know, how can we kind of connect up things that are happening at a community grassroots level with our local authorities, with organisations in the areas that we're making those changes. I don't know if we can get Rory back on the screen for the questions. Yeah, so just to start off, I thought it'd be really nice to just kind of connect up that that thought around, you know, how do communities work with local authorities and vice versa. So, yeah, I think just very simply, how do we bring those two levels of activity together? Like, what sort of change would you all like to see? I think you've been given some really inspiring examples, all of you, of how that's already happening in your work. So yeah, just a thought on that. How do you bring together institutional structures with grassroots action? Sorry?
So we think about this a lot, obviously, because we're a voluntary sector organisation and voluntary sector people, and then we work with the council, and part of that is about trying to work towards what's it called, cross-departmental working. So it's very difficult because councils are very siloed, so they work in their own departments. But Rezina was saying that the climate partnership is working cross-departmentally, but with Right to Grow, we'd really like to pioneer that as well. So because every department impacts food growing, like planning and legal and everything, and just to try and get that, we're all setting a goal, this is what we want to do, and then this is how the different departments and the different actors work. But it's like trying to change the world, basically, because councils don't work like that. Yeah. But that's when the big impacts would come, I think, if we could change the entire way that everybody works.
Yeah. I just want to add to what Tori said. It's so important to have that overall view of things, with declaring climate emergency and saying very honestly to our communities, we cannot do this by ourselves. You know, we can link people up and we can set direction, but actually everyone needs to get involved. And you know, dealing with climate and the climate crisis, you know, it's overwhelming, because even when we talk to, you know, businesses, they'll say, well, we want to do the right thing, but we need to know what to do. And, you know, can you tell us what we need to do and set direction for us? So that's as council, we see that as our role, working with London councils, working with central government now as well, to make sure that we're all aligned on that, but also providing leadership to our local communities who want to do the right thing, and linking them up to other organisations. In Lambeth and Southwark as well, we have these amazing anchor institutions, hospitals, arts, science, and academia, and making sure that we're using and tapping into all of that expert knowledge to help our communities and bring those in. And I just wanted to just refer to the climate adaptation work that you're doing here as well, bringing in residents from Tower Hamlets, Southwark and Lambeth, and the workshop around adaptation was really important.
Thank you. Brilliant. And I think it might be great to bring Rory in now, if that's okay, because I think some of your presentation touched on that point about resourcing and how can you make that resourcing of these initiatives more sustainable. So I don't know if you want to kind of come in on that.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsty, and good to hear those other perspectives as well. Great presentations, and great to see what's going on, and great to see so much participation going on as well. Just think it's wonderful and vital. I think the thing I've heard from every community organisation that we're working with, this is right around the UK, that the biggest challenge they've got is around working with their local authority. And interestingly, we ran a panel with folk from local authorities as well, and they recognise, it's not like it's not recognised by council officers and others. People working at local authorities understand that there's challenges around the bureaucracy, and what Tori was pointing to in terms of departments and bits of the council not all pulling in the same direction, or even just the difficulty of knowing who to speak to and when to go to them and how to go to them. And for the people who had the most effective relationships with their local authorities were those who have that person who can help unlock it. Like they've got a friendly council officer, basically, or sometimes a councillor who can help with that, who can go, right, this is how you get into this bit of the local authority, and here's how I can make this thing happen. So what would change the game, really, what Tori's spoken about in part, I think, is really a much stronger sort of trust relationship between the voluntary sector and local authorities. It exists in some places, but it could be much more widely rolled out if there was some sort of a way of de-risking those sort of partnerships for local authorities. So a way of recognising, whether through some form of accreditation or something else, that you can work with these organisations, and they can be a delivery partner to make stuff happen for you. They can much more effectively communicate and discuss things with the community. Often, I don't know how many of you have tried to engage with a local authority consultation. It's not always the most inspiring process, notwithstanding the fact that the likes of Lambeth have done citizens' assemblies, but it's often on a website in some labyrinthine corner of the local authority website, and it's really hard to navigate to. And I know the local authority websites need to have a lot of stuff in them, but community organisations tend to be much better at doing that sort of local connection thing. So how can we support and skill up to do co-design, put resources in place there, and have community organisations as delivery partners to take on, for example, green space management contracts on housing estates. Granton actually are in the process of trying to do that in Edinburgh, and in fact, I think Edinburgh Council have just changed their procurement rules to permit that to happen. But up until that point, they've had to go, as a community organisation, go through this whole process of trying to advocate to the council to change that. And it just seems the wrong way around, that we've got small organisations having to try and make those changes to very technical things when we could be driving it in a different direction, a much more holistic way. So I think the key to unlocking it is that thing that Tori and Rezina have talked a bit about, is smoothing that working across departments, and whether that's declaring an emergency or whatever else, but actually operationally making sure it's a bit of everyone's job, not solely the ecology department or the parks department. And then, trusting the community sector to deliver some of that, because they can do it far cheaper than big organisations can or local authorities can, and they can do it in a much more sustainable way, I think.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to try and offer another perspective as well, because we are commissioned by the council, so in a sense we represent them. But we are often commissioned as architects and landscape architects to work in areas where there is less sort of community engagement, or perhaps there aren't sort of growing spaces that are community run or grassroots organisations, perhaps on the edge of one borough and another, where sometimes people fall through the gaps. So it's at Bramcote Park, there are no youth centres that are very close, so we've worked with people who are sort of peripheral to that. And there's a sort of role for councils to play in commissioning these kind of projects to build capacity, to then go on to sort of start, people are very interested in starting things, but they, because of the risk to themselves, or they're just too busy, or they've got too many other things going on in their lives, they don't want to take on the leadership of some of these things without having anything to go to. So, what we're doing is trying to sort of create a space that we have to build it first before they have the confidence to come along. So that's another sort of important.
So I think there's something as well about, at Marchfields we took on the management of the park because we kind of had to at a certain point, and then have been through all that process. And there's something about understanding the inequality between the VCS, between the voluntary sector and the council, and the risks that people in the voluntary sector are taking in terms of insurance and public liability and just personal stress. And, like you say, we do it cheaper, but that's pretty difficult often for people. So there's something about how do we work with the local authority to handle that stress and that responsibility. And a lot of people are now delivering council services, so it's really, really urgent, I think, to address the difficulties that they're there, you know, that to help the VCS deliver.
Yeah, really helpful. Yeah, I was actually going to ask Tori in terms of that equity dimension in, you know, like, I think we saw it through the pandemic as well, when the kind of more affluent areas tended to be the ones with the kind of community support groups, and I think the kind of more vulnerable communities was something that came up in your presentation. So I don't know if you wanted to say a bit about how you're working to address that in the work that you're doing.
Inequalities in the communities?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So for example, in what Loretta was just saying, one of the things I took from it is that actually you need time and you need resource and you need space to be able to dedicate time to this. And so if you're working multiple jobs and you've got a lot of caring commitments or things like that, then this suddenly becomes a lot harder for you to kind of create this kind of change. So I don't know if you have any.
It's just an ongoing problem that, like, especially with the composting project, that people had other things on their mind apart from composting. So it was actually, we were meant to deliver 45 sites, but we delivered 15 in the end because there was such a lot of capacity building needed and community engagement needed. That's why I'm so pleased we've got the City Bridge funding, because we can actually do more capacity building. But I must say, there's such a huge amount of need in so many areas that isn't being, because of austerity and years of defunding. And I've been to other countries where, like in Portugal, they're still, we went to estates where they're doing food growing, but they're also running, the council is running food banks, and I'm not saying the council can, because they just don't have the resources, but the difference it made in terms of the number of people who engaged with food growing and composting, because they were actually addressing the needs of the community and thinking how shocking it is in this country, really, that we don't have any of that infrastructure anymore, really. It's just nothing. And there's huge need, and food growing kind of touches it, and it develops leaders who are, you know, committed, and they're kind of nurtured by the food growing, so it does a little bit of something, but you know, there's just enormous need, really.
Yeah, and I think one thing that has come through really strongly for me in all of your presentations is about how you work with the public to understand what they need before creating these things. I don't know, Alice, if you've got anything you wanted to bring in from the approach you're taking.
Yeah, definitely. I guess one of the challenges that we've had with Bramcote Park is about the ongoing maintenance of the park and who takes that on, because there's obviously like a sort of obviously Southwark, and it's so complicated as well. There's sort of long-term contracts of between different departments in the council, and Rachel will be able to talk about this much better than me. But you know, there's like the parks team, and then there's also the waste team and the maintenance team, and they all have different responsibilities to these different public green spaces. But it feels like it's the current setup at the moment seems to just be thinking about maintenance in terms of like chopping the grass, and doesn't really seem to be thinking about, doesn't have the money to be able to pay. It would be great if there was something like park stewards or something, if that existed, if there were people who were able to kind of, you know, really take charge of helping to shape these green spaces that aren't, you know, it's not just about chopping the leaves or whatever, it's sort of about helping to organise events to support that voluntary sector, because I also think it's quite hard to just expect it all to happen in the voluntary sector. I think it's like, you do need some, it would be great if there were jobs for people to, because there's also the appetite, like there are so many people, we've found through this project, there are so many people who really want to do that work locally as well, you know, and they're connected to the primary schools and the Surrey Canal Fruit Commons project, and lots of different groups, and they're just looking for a space to be able to run these things, and it's like, how we can, feels like everyone's trying, but it's just, it's a complicated system.
So there's something that Rory said about flexible funding. It's like so a lot of our projects are always funded as sort of capital spending, and we've got to just spend it on stuff that we put in the park. But actually, if there could be more a sort of re-evaluation of how we distribute spending on public space, that more of that could go towards sort of revenue spending on maintenance of these things, which would bring people along and you know, kind of nurture some of the skills that people already have or want to build. So projects like the Walworth Garden project, where they train horticulturalists, which we tried to sort of implement in the park as well. So that's kind of definitely a way forward.
I think Tori wanted to come.
We got £3 million for Marchfield Park when we did a very similar project in redeveloping and but that was from the Heritage Lottery Fund, and they funded a post that I did for about 7 years, and then the council took it on. And so I was doing audience development, then I was doing income generation, and now the park generates about 150,000 a year, and then that's spent on local people working in the park, and there's 5 businesses in there, and you know, but you need that core role really, and somebody who's committed, like a lunatic, to just doing it and doing it and doing it, you know, just yeah.
Just before I open it up to the audience for questions, I just wanted to come to Rory and Rezina as well, because you've both run a citizens' assembly, which is quite incredible. I think they're big things to do, and I think really it's kind of coming back to, I think it was Rory's point earlier. You were talking about how do we, you know, place stronger trust in the relationships between you know, local governance, national governance, and organisations, community organisations. I think there's an interesting conversation to be had there around this kind of like deliberative engagement moment in which we're bringing people into decision making around, you know, how we trust just ordinary people to have a say over the things that are affecting their lives. So I don't know if either of you want to come back on that.
I don't mind.
Yeah, shall I go first?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, yeah, sorry, Rory. I was going to say that actually the wonderful thing about citizens' assemblies is that people can, as well as being exposed to experts and having their minds open to all the other possibilities, it gives people a license to think really, really creatively about what it is they want. 2-hour focus groups, 1-hour depth interviews do not cut it. You know, when you're spending, you know, a lot of time with people over, you know, 4 to 6 weeks and giving them all this kind of food to think about, they'll come up with the most amazing ideas. And this is why we're able to do what we're able to do in Lambeth, because we've got permission. You know, our amazing residents who took part in the Citizens' Assembly came up with these brilliant ideas that we were able to put into our climate action plan and that we're able to deliver on. And when, you know, and there are people who say, oh, don't like you blocking off our roads, don't like that play street, don't like that park. We'll say, well, actually, this is what our residents want. And this is what they said they wanted, and we're delivering that. So this isn't top down. This is actually, you know, getting those spontaneous ideas from residents who said they wanted it. This is not us telling them what they need. This is them telling us, and it gives us permission to be bold.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think, so, I mean, you mentioned the timing of the Lambeth Citizens' Assembly was hampered by COVID, but it's also quite an interesting moment to be thinking about the very hyperlocal area in which you live. Rory, I don't know if you want to come in on that point as well before we open.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a big undertaking, and I don't take personal credit for that whole assembly being run. It was a UK-wide thing, and it was lots of brilliant organisations, including Involved, who actually sort of ran the assembly process and facilitated it, and we had the Sortition Foundation involved in sending out 30-odd thousand mail-outs to people around the UK to make sure we had a representative sample of the UK public, which we had in the room. But it's as Rezina says, what is amazing is it's a total antidote to the sort of online culture war that exists, that feels like no one's ever going to agree about anything ever again, and you're either in one camp or the other, and no good can ever happen, because people don't speak to each other like that in real life when they're presented with information, when they're meeting a new person. And to me, that it was the most inspiring thing to see people from like every walk of life in the UK sat in a hotel in Birmingham, but we did 2 online and 2 in person for our assembly, and sat like seeing a bunch of strangers and sort of not knowing how everyone was going to get on. Is this going to work? And the first session, everyone's sitting around tables quietly. There's an initial presentation, and then they were all, you know, a lot of it. There was presentations from experts, but most of it was deliberation. And that moment when the room just sparked into conversation, and everyone was talking to one another. And by the end of it, you know, people made friends. Like, people have, you know, sort of, you know, been kind of radicalized by the experience. They've gone on to do green space work in their community, or do something else, like career changes. all sorts of things have happened to the people involved in that assembly, and quite apart from all that, they had meaningful conversations, and people who you would never expect, who are politically diametrically opposed, or different religious or ethnic backgrounds or class backgrounds, are together around a table on a level, being facilitated and making sure everyone's got space and finding things to agree about, and coming up with ideas and coming up with brilliant things to do. So it shows a whole bunch of things, and it's totally counter to the narrative that people only want to fight, and we don't like each other and we can't agree on the solutions. Actually, almost every assembly I've seen the outputs of when it comes to climate or nature is much more progressive than what the national government of that country's policies are when it comes to doing something about climate and nature. And that tells you that people, when they see the evidence and they can have a discussion about it, they want to see action and they have practical ideas for doing it. So I think it's brilliant. What I'd love to see more of is, like, how do you keep that going down to the most localized level where you are? It's not always an assembly, but how do we make sure we co-design everything? So I loved hearing about that example at the park where you've got kids involved in that discussion about, right, what does it look like? What is it? How can we make this good? How does this serve your needs? Or hearing from Tori that food is such an entry point for people, and we found that in the assembly as well, that it's obviously very tangible for people. You know, we all eat, we all need to eat. So yeah, I think there's massive value in the approach. It doesn't just have to be a full-scale national assembly. It's just as valid at that very localized level, and in many ways it's even more important, because when people lean into their agency and they feel empowered having a discussion about something, when it's local, they've got the opportunity to be involved in directly implementing some of the stuff that they come up with. And I think that's where the beauty of a co-design process lies, that not only are you having a conversation with people about what they want, you're then basically planting a bunch of seeds among the community for people who are going to help you make that thing happen. And I think that's like a highly compelling reason to do much more of it.
Brilliant, thank you, Rory. So I'm just going to open it up to the audience now. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, one here. Quick one, quick hand up.
In Parliament today, you know, we had Sorry, one second.
Sorry, Laura, we were too rapid.
In Parliament today, we had Keir Starmer declaring that loads more money will be spent on defence. I would love to hear Ed Miliband standing up in Parliament saying, what about our climate emergencies that were declared some years ago that councils have just forgot about? Yeah. I think the ideas and the practice of citizens' assembly is so important, because nothing will come from top down, as you say. Our council has forgotten about the climate emergency. They've declared one. It's 2018. It was 2018. Nothing's happened. Although there are lots of, I come from the borough of Ealing, so I've travelled all the way from West London, and I'd love to, you know, to get things moving. And there are lots of initiatives, volunteer along, for example, in Perivale, you may have heard about the Horsenden Farm. It's great. So many people participate in so many different ways. But we need the councils to just step up, because they're a big block so a big block, blocking ideas and blocking activities, and yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just take one more and then we'll respond to them together. There's another question over here.
Sorry, it wasn't a question.
Oh, thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name's Glenn. I'm the Policy Director of an organisation called Sustain, which is the UK-wide Alliance for Better Food and Farming. I wanted to just make a couple of points about the national picture and then ask about the connection of the local, regional and national. We do, all of this is situated in national policy making, the role of the national government. There is going to be, for example, a new food strategy, Sustain, look out for it. We'll be campaigning with others for new law and regulation to change our food system, which is now responsible for as many climate emissions as our entire electricity system. It's crazy. And we support sustainable food places across the UK as well. So I wanted to just ask really around your connection local to regional and national. You spoke about the inspiration of the original Incredible Edible in Yorkshire, for example. At a local level, what's happening across London with other boroughs, across the nations, about how local authorities learn from each other about how we progress. And even our friends in the sort of architecture planning space, there must be national fora in which you share that learning that we all need to accelerate. Rory works for a national organisation, but he also may have something to say about it. Because I think this national, regional, especially with devolved government now, which is coming in, whole new structures, whole new mayoral systems, it's a real opportunity, but it's a massive risk that the whole system kind of crashes out the chance for people to make a change. So thank you.
Thank you both. Some big questions there. I don't know if anyone feels like taking them. Tori, yeah?
If that's all right. So one of the things I love about food growing is if I grow a little bit of food, it connects me to my food, to the food system. It helps me in a very visceral way understand what it means. But then so we work on the Right to Grow with Capital Growth and Sustain, and we work with Land Workers Alliance and making as many alliances as we can. So we did the Right to Grow conference, the first London conference with Capital Growth and Sustain. So it's just a matter of really joining up as much as we can and understanding about agroecology and the sort of new moves there are in terms of making a sustainable food system. We can learn that through very localised things, but we went to Parliament recently to advocate with Land Workers Alliance and Sustain. So it gives us an in, and what we really want to do is empower our members to be more part of those networks as well and able to campaign for the things that Sustain is campaigning for, so more of a grassroots kind of.
Anyone else want to come in? Looking for the Rory. You finding the unmute?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's massive connections from right from the local level up to the national level. Obviously, the sort of levers of policy at a national level, clearly, there needs to be more faith in that devolved model. And in theory, it's happening, right? But you find everywhere that there is fear of people making decisions or involving people in decision-making processes that's still there. And even with the proliferation of more citizens' assemblies and more bits of participatory budgeting and things like that are going on, there is still quite a fear about letting people close to the keys. And I think that's something we've got to try and get over. And we need to, if anything, we need to try and empower things like assemblies and localized decision making more, because it gives people a sense of responsibility. People are responsible when you give them responsibility. They do come up with sensible ideas. Like any myths or misconceptions people have about what comes out of these processes, I think can be dispelled now, because I think solid things come from it. It's not daft decision making that happens. It's good ideas. It's tangible things, and it's things that people support. But yeah, I think there are huge connections. Obviously, a big part of the picture of austerity has already been mentioned, and many local authorities are still struggling under, the sort of lack of funding they've got, and many voluntary sector organisations have stepped into the gap and are doing delivery, as Tori mentioned. And I think what we need is a sort of new acknowledging that's the world that we're in. How do we make sure that we, yes, support the voluntary sector, but yes, also continue to support local authorities to deliver things, and do it in a more dispersed way, do it in a way that is more supportive of the grassroots and gets more people involved and becomes more community centric. We are a society that is suffering from mental ill health, that is suffering from poor physical health, that is suffering from loneliness. And many of the things around food growing and biodiversity and improving our spaces and tackling the climate emergency, they all overlap. These things are all interconnected. So in terms of how to open that up, I mean, there's a massive and difficult question you've asked there, but I think part of it is about what is that new model like. What does system change look like when it comes to further empowering or helping people lean into their agency locally and helping them get involved? How do you deal with some of the barriers? So barriers have been mentioned around people not having the time, or perhaps working 2 jobs and not having the literal time, or the risk that's there to take on something new or look after a green space. How can we crack some of those barriers down? And there's not a lack of money in this country. It's poorly distributed and not equally distributed, but there's plenty of money around to make this stuff happen. So yeah, I'd love to see more of that. And perhaps the one thing that I'm aware of that's going on in this space is National Trust and Heritage Lottery Fund, along with Natural England, are in the process of launching something called Nature Towns and Cities. It's kind of got 3 strands, one of which is a grant fund, which is in the process of being determined. It's going to go to a sort of a handful of towns and cities who've been asked to submit a further more detailed application. There's going to be a network that's part of it as well, so sharing knowledge. I mean, it's mainly sort of local authorities are a big part of it, but others are community organisations. There's going to be a specific strand for them, so a network to share knowledge. And then the other element of it is going to be about accreditation and being able to say that you're a nature town and city by meeting certain criteria and following a process. And if we can create a way of rewarding those who are going down that route, so not just declaring an emergency, but what are you doing about said emergency, and here's the things that you need to do it, making sure that's done in a participatory way and saying, right, if you want to be a nature town or city, you've got to involve people, and here's the way that you've got to do it. And how do we attach and attract funding into that to make sure that it's sustained, so that it is not a whole bunch of organisations who are all doing great work, but they're competing with each other for ever smaller pots of money. But rather, how do we create a sort of sustainable finance models in places along the lines of which Tori's described, that transformational work that is about boots on the ground and somebody with the gumption and working with other organisations to make that stuff happen, rather than saying, here's 5,000 KPIs, deliver on these in the next 2 years, and we will scarcely cover it with peanuts of funding. It needs that kind of more open-ended capacity building support, and I'd love to see more of that going on. So yeah, there you go, there's the solution sorted.
Just going to come to Rezina and then we'll do a couple more questions.
Yeah, so Rory mentioned capacity building, and that's critical for us in Lambeth because we are such a diverse borough, and I'm not talking about ethnicity, I'm talking about income and wealth, where we have pockets of affluence, very middle class areas where people are a lot more engaged in their communities. They will be on the board of Friends of various parks. And they will have presence on certain decision making or influencing boards. And our challenge in Lambeth is because we root the climate emergency for us it's about social justice as well as climate justice, and making sure that we put additional resource in, making sure that our residents who live in the most deprived parts of the borough feel empowered. And making sure that we have organisations and networks that reach out to people whose English may not be a first language. We have a massive Portuguese and Latinx community in Lambeth, Black African, Black Caribbean, as well as other communities as well, and making sure that language barriers don't prevent people from taking a much more active part in our communities. So it's, as Tori said, sometimes people have other things going on in their lives, and maybe climate, food growing, gardening isn't top of mind for them, yet it is crucial for them because they're the ones who are going to feel the worst impacts of climate on their lives, and they're going to be the least resilient and have least capacity to do something about it. So it's our responsibility as councils to actually to make it relevant and make it important, and we do that in a range of ways, whether it's by putting additional resource in those local communities, but also working with schools as well. Children taking that information home to their parents food growing in schools as well. We've got some amazing primary schools in Lambeth where some very kind of sort of progressive and prolific heads who are leading the way on this. So yes, it's difficult, it's challenging, and 14 years of austerity and defunding of local authorities means that we've had to be more creative and innovative of how we face these challenges. But I don't like, we have hope and we've got ambition, so that'll hopefully get us through.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got one question in the middle. I just wanted to check if we've got any online as well. Maybe we can take one online as well.
Yeah, we've got one question from online. I know sort of Rory in particular, you've spoken to this a little bit already, but lots of the speakers mentioned co-designing in their plans and strategies. What were the challenges and opportunities that arose from these processes?
Brilliant. And then question in the middle as well.
Thanks, sorry about that. Hey, thanks for the presentations. I was really interested in Rory's example of the sort of proximity of libraries and green spaces as a sort of connection between social justice and climate justice. And it was quite a timely example with the Lambeth Council's decision to cut funding of the Lambeth libraries by 25% recently. So I was wondering how you all conceptualize the link between social justice and climate justice that is sort of in a robust way, more than representation, but geared towards the actual transformation of spaces, especially in gardens, the sort of links between how the sort of community gardens are invested in sort of more private spaces, maybe of housing, and then the sort of park refurbishment, how it works with the actual functioning of the estates, for example. So yeah, I was just wondering how communities actually interact with the green space and how they're brought in a sort of space of transformation rather than deliberation or representation or permission, as it were. Thanks.
Can I just quickly correct something? So Lambeth libraries are not cutting services by 25%. In fact, there were some staff vacancies that had been vacant for a couple of years, and those aren't being filled, and that's where the saving is from. So we still have our libraries, and so no services are being cut.
Thank you. And yeah, just to pick up on those points, I think they're quite well aligned. So I think one is around how communities interact with the spaces once they're built, and how we can bring social justice into that. And then the other side of it is what does that co-design process look like to make sure those spaces reflect what people need? What are the opportunities and challenges that come from that? I don't know if Alice and Loretta, you want to...
Yeah, well, I think definitely the first thing about how people interact with spaces if they've been involved in delivering them is there is quite transformational how different those spaces feel and look if people who have an involvement in there and are going to be using it in the long run are involved in how it's developed, and they just become more of a sort of shared, people feel that they have ownership over that space, they feel sort of entitled to be able to sort of say, oh, I want to come and do this thing here or whatever, and it's just it feels more like sort of, I guess, genuinely public space, and I guess it's also just touching on your question before, but I think that the built environment industry is way behind the sort of food industry, and we don't really have these sort of national big meetups or discussions about how to sort of develop the built environment in an ecological way. And at the moment, so far it just happens through project by project, but in the sort of showing them as examples. But I guess in the past, there used to be council architects who were part of the council, and so they could have that sort of longer term commitment to development of an area and a place, and could sign up to those longer term strategies. But it's not how the system is set up now. We're all on a sort of project by project commission, so it's a lot harder, I think, to be able to make any longer term change in anything. You just do it by demonstration.
And also to kind of sort of keep momentum as well. So that's something we were discussing. Was one of the challenges with our project is to try to maintain sort of momentum through a very long sort of protracted planning process and designing process. So you might have worked with people, you know, we've been working on this project since few years anyway, I can't remember. And so some of the things that we've done with people, with young people, was quite a long time ago in their lives. They've totally moved on to something else. So it's quite actually difficult to sort of manage that. So we build up expectation, and then, you know, that they, especially young people, want to see something happen tomorrow, and that's quite difficult to sort of maintain. But so that's something we're sort of wrestling with all of the time. But, you know, co-design in general is quite complex, and I think that there's a bit of a trap in thinking that we're all going to design together. And quite often when I've done a lot of these things, and people are like, well, you're the designer. You know, I want to, you know, you want to find out what people's priorities are, and try to understand their sort of the issues that are going on in their lives and how space relates to that. But you don't want to put too much onus on people to sort of do your job for you either. So I think to act as an intermediary is really important.
Yeah, it also seems as much to be about them hearing what other residents are saying about the space as it is about what they're saying to you. It's sort of, you know, them saying, you know, there's this example in Bramcote Park where there's a caged games area, Mugger, which is like massively, it's like the only sort of play facility on site, so it's the most heavily used, but it's really like sort of well loved by like one small group of kids. But you know, a lot of the residents around it find it really difficult because it's really noisy and like windows have been broken and stuff like that. So that we didn't talk about at all, but that's been like a massive part of the project, trying to decide, do we keep the caged games area, do we get rid of it, how we can make it more, a space where to expand the number of people who use it, or use a balls area, ball games area.
The kind of people as well.
The kind of people as well. So it's, you know, more girls can have access to the space, and you know.
I think we've got time for one more question. If anyone else, yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much for what you've been speaking about. My question is, I'm new to London, I'm from Australia, I'm wanting to meet people, connections. I've been looking out for grassroots programs. I'm just wondering, what's the best way to get involved? What are the ways to learn about these programs? And to make friends and things.
Brilliant.
So my answer to that would be go onto your council website, and there'll be a list of VCS organisations. There'll be, if you're interested in parks, gardening, there'll be lots of friends of different organisations that you could join. So there's lots of opportunities. You might be overwhelmed because there is a lot of opportunity there. But again, you know, go into any library, there'll be loads of information about organisations, advertising their events. So I think, and before you know it, you'll be on about 1,000 WhatsApp groups telling you. So yeah, don't think it'd be very hard.
Anyone else want to come in? Maybe Tori?
If anybody wants to be involved, you just email us. You can go on the website and find out. And if you want to be a director or get involved with actually sort of supporting that, then that's fine. But also you can look on the website and look on a map and see which is your local project. But email us anyway, and we'll just tell you. Just think about how you can get involved and what local group might want you. Or
most of these projects are super friendly as well. You just turn up and,
super
you know, they're cooking together, and you just, you know, they'll be very happy to see you and get you working.
Yeah, I was going to say similar, like keep your eyes for some people planting some trees in Nunhead the other day. Like it's, go and talk to people when you see these things happening as well. Brilliant. We've got 10 minutes left, so I just want to go back to the panel to have kind of final thoughts on everything we've been discussing today. So maybe if you just all could give us one key takeaway. Maybe we'll go in the order in which you spoke. So Rory, do you want to go first?
Oh God, no pressure. Quickly say something profound. I actually just want to come back to one of the questions just there, which was about this social justice and climate justice. And to me, it's the Venn diagrams of a circle. You know, they are absolutely the same thing. And co-design actually can help you deliver social justice. It's not the whole picture, but if you're genuinely curious about what people want in a place, and you're genuinely interested and you genuinely involve people, and you reach out to bits of the community that might not have been involved in the conversation, to to what Rezina was saying earlier. How do you avoid just hearing from the middle class friends of members? But how do you make sure that you're reaching out to those who don't always come to those discussions or feel welcome? And at the very start of it, therefore, make sure you're asking the right questions. Don't go in saying, what do you want from this green space, or what type of courgette do you want to grow? Go in saying, what is it that you love about this place? What do you not love about this place? What would you like to be different? What are your challenges? What would improve things? And go in with that curiosity and begin the process in a genuine place of wanting to find out what people want and need, and then frame your questions correctly, and then do your outreach. But do proper co-design. That's kind of in the fundamentals of it, and it will help you deliver social justice and help you get to that place that's solid. And actually, just thinking about what you were talking about with Bramcote Park there, and people sort of often turning to look at you like, right, well, I'm glad you're asking what I think, but I don't know how to, make a swing set, or design a tree grove or whatever. I think that's such an important thing, is to make sure the experts are there. And I've got a pal, Julie, who runs an organisation called Octopus Community Network in Islington. Sorry to reference North London area, but she says the experts on tap, not on top, and I think that's a great way of describing it. So that's what I would finish with.
Brilliant, thank you, Rory. Should we come to Tori next?
Well, just money, I suppose, and the exhaustingness of prolonged austerity, and the fact, I mean, the question about libraries and the sort of sense of, oh God, keeping on having to fight the same battles and worrying about the same things, and the need for money to go into the co-design and the community empowerment, and where is the money? And like Rory said about the ever diminishing amount of money, and the amount, there just needs to be a different kind of model, different way of looking at it.
Yeah, I really like the experts on tap, not on top. That is a great phrase. But yeah, it was just quite inspiring to hear about the citizens' assemblies, actually, and I just feel like it would be great to sort of look at doing one about how we can make best green space, and to include architects and landscape architects in that conversation as well, because I think that would be I think that would just be fascinating, and that would also, it seems like that could potentially help to solve some of the issues that we're talking about today, about how it's maintained longer term, and sort of what the priorities are.
I was really interested to hear about the climate group in Southwark being this kind of cross-cutting kind of group, and I thought that would maybe those kind of finding ways to connect people in silos is the sort of most, that's been the biggest challenge in everything that I do in my company, and probably same with Alice, is this kind of we've got these overlapping crises and but also interests of lots of different people, and there's no sort of shortage of willingness in all these different silos, but to be able to have a platform or a way for them to connect quicker, and in the long term, not just kind of fleetingly, I think is really important.
Rezina?
Yeah. So I'm going to be very positive. Try and be very positive about this, despite everything else that's going on in the world right now. Because if we thought that acting on climate now is really hard, but if we leave it till later, it's going to be even harder. And that's the kind of message that I tried to say to residents when they kind of write angry emails to me about why their parking charge is going up, or why is there an LTN going in, and why am I curtailing their freedom to be able to drive wherever they want to, and those arguments we have to have every day. And my concern is, with everything that's happening in the world right now, we're still going to have to keep making those arguments. There's no let up. We can't just sit back and say everyone gets it now. I think it's going to get even harder, and so we will have to hold our nerve, and we just have to keep making those arguments over and over again. And I think everyone has to do it, So, and this is what I have some really, really brave residents who will put their heads above the parapet and challenge some of those loud voices on WhatsApp, on Facebook, on Nextdoor, and talk about why we need to be doing stuff around sustainable transport or food growing or whatever. And they're brave because actually there's a whole tirade against them, and we need to be supporting people who are brave.
What a nice note to end on. So thank you. Thanks so much to our brilliant panel and for all the questions from the audience as well. It's been really, really interesting event, and thank you all for coming out as well. Really appreciate you taking the time. Cool.